Alright, so before we begin our journey, let's talk about a couple of things. Uh, a lot of the technologies that we'll work with, Node.js, MongoDB, Express, and a little bit of AngularJS, the beauty of it is that full stack web development using JavaScript technologies is all based on, you guessed it, JavaScript. So, in order to use those technologies, you have to have a firm understanding of JavaScript itself. So that's the topic of this lecture. I will give you a brief primer of JavaScript, as you should all have taken core JavaScript. This is just a reintroduction to the language. If you already feel comfortable with JavaScript, feel free to skip this lecture and go on to the next topics. All right? So the very first thing we'll talk about are variables and how we define variables. So remember that we use variables to temporarily store and access data from our scripts. All right. So the simplest way to define a variable in JavaScript is to use the var variables, such as var myData. All right. This creates a variable called myData, and right now, what does it store? Well, it stores the value undefined because we did not give it a value. So by typing myData, we see that we get back undefined. If we want to assign a value to it, we must use the equal sign. And in this case, I'm going to assign it the value some text. So now if I type myData, it stores the string some text. All right. We can declare it. That's me declaring it on one line. We can also declare it on 2 lines. Right now it's undefined. Now I can assign a value to it as such. So if I say my string is now equal to Adrian Tillman. Alright? We can concatenate strings such as this. What should I get? You guessed it, Adrian Tillman. Alright? Now, what are our different data types? If you remember what a data type is, a data type defines the operations that can be performed on a variable. Alright? So we have different types or data types for our values. The first type we have is the one we just saw, which is a string. Alright? String is just a series of data, and the way we recognize a string is that it's contained within single or double quotes. Alright, we also have the number data type. Alright, so anytime we want to store a numerical value, 1, 2, 2.5, etc., we use the number data type. Alright, so I can declare a number value using var as well, 1.33. Our cost is the value 1.33. Notice no quotes around it. Alright, we also have the Boolean type, which gives us the ability to store values of true and false. So remember, when we use if statements or loops, we have that conditional part that requires a value that is a Boolean data type. So those are our true and false values. As such. Alright. We also have arrays. Arrays allow us to store continuous values and access them using the same variable. So for instance, I'll create a array storing the numbers or the strings 1, 2, 3. Alright, and then I can access them by index. Alright? So we also have arrays. We also have object literals, right, which give us the ability to create objects that we may want to use once or twice within our program. Alright, so for instance, I can have the object obj, and I use the squiggly brackets, then I'm going to give it a name property. I have an occupation. I have an age. Fudge that a little bit. And I can create that object like so. Alright, so that gives me an object literal, and I can access the values using the dot notation. And so, all right. We also have our operators that we use for arithmetic operations, and they're standard operators like you remember from Python. So, operators for addition, the plus sign, right? So x is going to be equal to 6. You have subtraction, the minus sign, right? Increment, which is adding 1 to the value. So y equals x. Y is not equal to 4, right? Decrement, which is minus minus. You also have multiplication. Right? You get division, which is the regular divide, and then you have the modulus operator, which is the percent sign. All right? Nothing too unfamiliar from other languages here. I can't find my modulus operator right now. There we go. And the remainder is 1. So remember, modulus always returns the remainder. All right. You also have some shortcut assignment operators, such as plus equals. Right. So x plus or equal 5. That's going to add 5 to the existing value of x. You also have minus equals, times equals, divide equals, and modulus equals. Do pretty much the same thing. Our comparison operators are the operators that allow us to evaluate two values for equality, and they return true or false given the result. So for instance, I can say 8 equals 8. Notice that's 2 equal signs. That gives me true. If I say 8 equals 7, that gives me false. If I say 8 greater than 7, right, that's true. If I say 8 less than 7, that's false. All right. We also have not equal to. Let's see if we get 8 not equal to 8. That's false. What if we say 8 not equal to 7? That's true. All right. You also have your greater than equal to or your less than equal to when you need to compare that value, that exact value, and one more. Okay. In addition to the comparison operators, we often find the need to also use the logical operators and or. So in JavaScript, and is that, and it wants me to put in another value. Start it over. So 5 and 6. All right, this gives me 6. All right, but if I say true and true, I get back a true. Remember, both sides must be true in order for an and to give you a true. If I see true and false, I'm going to get a false because both sides must be true. All right. Same thing for the or, only one side need to be true. So true or false gives me true. If I say false or false, I'm going to get a false. So at least one must be true in order to get a true. All right. If statements. All right. So remember, our if statements are just simply the if followed by the condition. It's going to be some sort of Boolean value. All right. If we have multiple lines, we're going to put them within the squiggly brackets. All right. Close it like that. All right. So notice that if evaluated the true, so it printed 5. So if 5 not equal to 5, so that should evaluate false. To compile. You get the point though. Alright, we can also do loops. Alright, so loops allow us to do something repeatedly, and in JavaScript, I keep wanting to say Python because my mind is on Python, we primarily use the while loop to do so. So while I is less than 5, let's do console.log. What do I want to do? Iteration. Notice it's going continuously forever because I never incremented I. So don't forget to increment I or you end up with an infinite loop. And an infinite loop is not good. In my case, my infinite loop does not want to execute. Exit. Alright, so let's open that back again. Alright, so that's our while loops. Alright, let's see what else. You also have do while loops. For loops are common. Alright, so for, remember for was var. You do the for, you do your brackets, you have your starting value. So we'll start at x is equal to 1, and we'll go x is less than or equal to, less than or equal to 3. Less than or equal to 3. And then we'll increment x. So because you're doing increment here, it's less likely that you'll forget to increment it within the loop. All right. So there's our for loop. Notice our 3 iterations. Each pass x contains the new value between 1 and 3. All right. Remember that we can check and see if a value is in, or we can iterate over an array by using for in. So if I had the array for days equals Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right? And I said for our day in days, day is going to take on the value of each successive value in that array days. Alright. Move this out of the way. So here I'm just printing all the values in days. So 0, 1, 2. Alright, so what happened here? Why did that 0 take on the value of 0, 1, and 2? Well, it's just an indexer, so be very careful of that. What we really need to write is for var day in days. Alright, and we want console log days and use day as the indexer for it. Alright. Now we get our desired result. So be careful of that if you're using the for in loop. Alright. Remember that we can exit a loop by using the break command. So by putting the break inside of the loop, it will automatically exit out of the for loop or whatever loop we're using and go to the next line. All right, we also have continue if we want to skip an iteration of the loop and keep going. All right, so we can use continue for that. We have the concept of functions. We create functions by using the function key name. So function by function. In this case, we're going to have to print out hello world. Alright, so that defines the function, and when I want to execute the function, I call this name. Alright, and then the code within, that's defined within that function, will execute. We can also define arguments or parameters for a function by typing them in the argument list. Alright. So I'm saying here that I need 2 values, one called name, one called city. Pass to this function, and you call it. So now that function greeting, remember the values that it has to it are able to be used inside of the function. All right. Notice that hello John. Period. How is the weather in Tampa? All right. So we can also pass values from a function. We can also return values from a function by using a return statement. All right. So var format greeting. We don't define a function. Format greeting. Say we want to format it as some HTML or HTML string. So we can do something like this. Declare return string is empty, and we'll say return string is going to be equal to, we're going to make it bold. I'm going to pin the name to it. And then we want to pin the new line to it. Alright. Now if we want to return that value back to the caller, we'll say return string. That returns it back to the caller. Alright, so now when we use it, we want to assign the return value to a variable. And now I can use that return value outside of the function. There you go. There's my string return. Alright. Anonymous functions. Alright, so remember we talked about anonymous functions way back in core JavaScript. They'll become more important now. Alright, they'll become more important. We'll go over them again, right? But anonymous functions have the advantage that we can define them directly as a parameter when we pass them to another function. You'll see them a lot in client-side JavaScript when we're handling events, and we'll pass a function to it. We only want to define that function one time, so we'll make it anonymous, etc., and pass it directly to the caller that's going to use it. Alright, and I'll go over anonymous functions a little bit more later. Alright, another thing I want you to remember is that variable scope in JavaScript acts a little bit differently than in the other languages you're used to. Alright, so remember that if I define a function using var outside of any function, then, such as in the main, outside of any function, then that variable is visible within any function. That variable becomes global. Alright? Now, if I declare a variable in a function and I do not use var, right, then that variable is also declared globally. So remember to use var when declaring your variables inside of a function, or they'll be considered global in scope. Alright? You saw where I created an object, and we can access objects with our dot notation. Alright? And I think that is all I'm going to review for now. That should be enough to get you started. If you need any more information on particular things, feel free to reach out to me, and I will provide some additional lectures to help you out. All right? Take care.